for all of you out there, there's a solution. There might be multiple solutions. Now, I don't know what they are right now, but your job is to go find them. And when people tell you there's only one way, call bullshit and move forward.
Welcome to the Ignited Recovery Podcast, a new way forward for anyone looking for answers but feeling left out. If you've been searching for empowerment, triumph, and purpose, you've found them right here. You won't hear the same solutions, and you're not going to have any excuses to fall back on, because Ignited Recovery allows heroes to rise and become their best selves. I'm Dr. Adi Jaffe, and I can't wait to be your guide on this journey. Are you ready to become an ignited hero?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Ignited Recovery Secrets Podcast. I'm Adi Jaffe, and I'm here to start out talking to you today about the personal story, but not my personal story. Instead, the story of my family. I don't know if you heard it or not, but I did an episode recently talking to my sister about what it was like for her to go through having a brother who's addicted, who was gone a lot, who was just not a functioning member of the family. And it was honestly it's just one of my favorite episodes that I've ever recorded. If you haven't heard it, we'll put a link to it here, but go check it out. It's pretty magical. And then my mom was here visiting Sophie and I pretty recently. And, you know, one of the things that I see whenever I see my mom is really sort of where we had left things. And what I mean by that, a little bit at least, is all the negative stuff that happened when I was out there. Now, we haven't done an episode with her. I don't really know if we ever will. Her English is not as good as my sister's. B, I don't really know that I want to put her through all that. And that's my way of saying that things were really not good when I was acting out. They just weren't. And again, even if we don't ever sit down with her, I know for a fact that when my parents got that call from the lawyer that told them that their son had just been arrested, and my mom literally was confused. She literally essentially said to the guy, "No, I'm pretty sure you have the wrong number." And he goes, "No, it's your son. It's your son in jail, having just been arrested for drug dealing." And my parents had no idea what to do. Yeah, my dad was a physician. Yeah, my mom was educated and knew a lot about the world, but she had no idea. They had no idea what to do with this piece of knowledge. And so what they did is what everybody told them to do. And what everybody told them to do was the traditional thing. My lawyer, the person they hired, who was, by the way, actually on the board of the rehab that he ended up recommending to my parents, everybody else told them there was one way to get better. You go to rehab, you fix this, you get sober, and you get to the other side. And so they went with it. They weren't incredibly well off at the time. They were struggling financially a little bit, but they went with it. And, you know, they paid what is now the equivalent of like $12,000 to $15,000 a month, which is not an incredibly expensive rehab, but, you know, expensive nonetheless. And they went with what they were told to do. And now if you've heard my story, you know that first rehab, the more expensive rehab I went to, where I was at for 3 months, actually didn't work, right? We went to meetings every day. We did groups, about 12 steps in the place itself. That was the place where I first knew that I was supposed to call myself an alcoholic and an addict. But it's also the place I relapsed within a month and used in for pretty much every day for 2 months before they found out. And I got out. And after I got out, I had that conversation. I believe you heard about it in my conversation with Sophie about what's going on with my dad, where I actually came clean and told him that I was lying to him about wanting to move out of rehab and that I'd actually been kicked out, which was quite a turning point for me. But the reason I'm getting into it here is I see the same sort of story in families all the time. Families deal with this all the time. By the time they actually come to me, almost always without fail, because they tell me it's not that easy to find me, they've usually spent hundreds of thousands, sometimes literally close to $1 million, which is insane to me, because the reason they're showing up at my doorstep, the reason they're calling me, is all of those things have failed. And that's what pisses me off so much when people online try to, I'll say, talk shit, right? I'll just go out right out and say it about my methods, because the reality is a lot of those methods out there are just not doing what they're supposed to do. They're just not. And so I get families when they're broken, like their loved ones. They've tried everything. They've emptied out their bank accounts. They've mortgaged their family house again. They've taken out savings. They've done whatever they could to get their loved one, the husband, the wife, the daughter, the son, the parent, the uncle, the girlfriend. And it just didn't bear fruit. And so many families that I've never met struggle with this, right? I'm going to tell you the story of some of the families that I have met today, but when a loved one suffers with addiction or a mental health issue, there's really no nuance to the answers the families are made to choose from. Depending on kind of who you go to, they tell you, well, this is the way, you got to do this. If you don't do it, then what you're doing is you're not really loving your child, husband, parent, sibling, wife, whatever, the right way. You're going to enable them and they're going to die. And the thing is that every single answer they ever get, it seems so certain. Like, I know what will fix your loved one. But then so many of the solutions, after they get followed through on, don't actually deliver the result. And so families get broken. They stop trusting their own judgment. They stop believing that there's a chance at the end, right? They stop really seeing this as a rainbow and you just got to get to the other side of it. They just feel like they're going to be stuck in this place forever. Now, in today's episode, I'm going to show you and tell you why it is that so many of these solutions fail. And I'm going to break it down into hopefully what will be easily digestible ways for you to understand this. And if you are a loved one of somebody who struggles, you're going to want to listen for sure. But also, if you struggle or you know somebody who struggles, send this to their family. Because I know their family is wary. They're not sure what to do. They're confused. They've lost hope. This will change the way they look at things. And so I'm going to talk about 3 primary elements that I want to break this down by. And the first one is just the mere fact that addiction is not what you've been told that it is. We now in this country subscribe to the addiction as a disease model. And the idea is drug use changes your brain in a way that makes it uncontrollable for you to use drugs. And then there are genetic predispositions. And when you marry those two things into somebody, they're shit out of luck. That's a concept my parents were told about. My parents were told that I had a disease. It was addiction. My dad was a physician, so it made sense to him, but it confused the hell out of my mom. Especially because the disease name they told her I had was alcoholism. And she said, well, he's never really had a problem with alcohol. By the way, I drank like a fish in the end of high school and college. But that's what she would say. I was like, well, drinking is not his issue. How could he have alcoholism? But it didn't matter, right? That's what they were sold. That's what they were told. Now, here's the thing. If addiction was just the disease that everybody describes that it is, then all the solutions would be medical solutions, right? Let's just think about it that way. There's no other disease that anybody gets sent to spiritual meetings where you pray. That's not a way to fix the disease unless you're a Christian Scientist, right? And so assuming that drug use is a disease, that alcoholism is a disease, that addiction is a disease, we don't really treat it. And the rehab that I went to 100% did not treat it the way we normally treat diseases. And that leaves the second concept, and the one that I hate even more than the disease concept, because at least the disease concept got us out of this one when it first got proposed, and that is the moral concept. Addicts are bad, they're liars, they're narcissistic, their brains are damaged, And so therefore they cannot make, like, the morality part of their brain doesn't function. They can't make morally justified decisions. They only care about their drugs and or alcohol and will do anything to get it. Before the disease concept, literally they were possessed. The devil was in alcoholics and addicts was the understanding. Now we've nuanced that, right? We just give them these really terrible names and statements. And here's the thing, right? If you're a parent, you know this was false for you when you first were told this. Either the disease concept or the moral concept just felt off a little bit. And here's why. If you've read my book, The Abstinence Myth, you know the ignited recovery concept of what drives alcohol use and addiction. And that is 4 separate factors. And they are biology, psychology, environment, and spirituality. Now, that concept alone is not new. There's an assessment that every rehab does when your loved one goes in. It's called the biopsychosocial assessment. The problem is nobody ever looks at it, and it never changes the course of treatment, because regardless of how you score on the biopsychosocial, you always get the same treatment in all these places. And the point that I make in my book, The Abstinence Myth, and if you haven't checked it out, please check it out. It's easy. You can get an audiobook and download and listen to it. What I'm saying is the reason addiction is not what you've been told it is because addiction is not even one thing. Addiction is totally different depending on the mix of biology, psychology, environment, and spirituality that a person suffers from. So yes, genetics matter, but not everybody who struggles with addiction or alcohol issues has genetic predispositions, has the genetics, the markers that we know make it more likely you'll be addicted. And then psychology or trauma, we know heavily affects people's mental health and their addiction likelihood. But not everybody suffers with trauma, and definitely not everybody suffers with big T trauma, right? Near-death experiences, sexual assaults, physical assaults, living in war-torn or highly criminalized areas of the country or the world. But people who do have a big problem. And then there's the third factor, the environmental factor, right? Some of us are born into areas where there's not a lot of drug use, or we don't get to model a lot of drinking and drug use from our parents and the people around us. And other people are born in areas that are rife with drugs and alcohol from the moment they're born, and people around them are always using. Well, guess what? That increases the likelihood that you will do things as well. And lastly, spiritual. And my concept of spiritual is very, very different here. And what I mean by that is the way I see spirituality is any connection to anything that is bigger than you. And bigger than you not as an entity, but like my purpose in life is to help people beat their shame and live purposeful, ignited lives. Well, that's my purpose, is my spiritual connection, right? I wake up to that need to help people. All those people that I help, they are bigger than I am. And that is enough for me for spirituality, but it's something that I didn't have before. So 4 factors: biology, psychology, environment, spirituality. What you have to do for every person who suffers is you got to figure out their mix, and then you got to go after their individual mix. Addiction is never one thing. There are tens of thousands of different combinations of those factors and severities. And so when you go to a physician and tell you, well, addiction is a disease, you got to fix it with medication, they might be right if the person in front of them is primarily suffering biologically, but it won't help their trauma. And if you go to a psychologist who primarily believes in trauma and only fixes that, then they won't fix any of the environmental issues necessarily. They won't help the spiritual stuff, and they won't help the biology. And then if you walk into an AA meeting, maybe the spiritual piece will work. Some of the environmental stuff will work for sure, but the biology and the psychology are not touched. And actually, psychologically, people can feel more shame, and it can make the problem worse. So the first reason why traditional approaches don't work, and why if you keep banging your head against the wall and not understanding what's wrong, is literally the way they look at the problem is wrong. And that leads us into point number 2. Telling somebody that they're broken and defective and then expecting them to get better is just not a great way to start the conversation. Think about any fight you've ever had with your loved one. Not the one struggling. Let's say you're married with your wife. Let's say you're a child who has parents and you fought with your parents. Have you ever tried starting a conversation with, "You're stupid," or "You're an idiot," or your brain doesn't work. You've always been a moron. Imagine starting a conversation that way about really any topic and believing you're going to get to a useful solution in the end. I don't have time to get into this in this specific episode, but I've given a TED Talk on it. I've actually kind of given 2 TED Talks on it. I've written articles on it. The power of belief is magnificent. Go look at the TED Talks. Go see some of the stuff I've put on online. The Pygmalion effect, stereotype threat, observer expectancy bias, the Lucifer effect, and the confirmation bias are just fancy psychological research terms for saying that what you believe about somebody else and what you believe about yourself will become more real and will take more of your attention, which in turn will create more of the world you live in. Our beliefs about addiction are, as I pointed out earlier, that addicts are liars that don't care about anybody else. They will say anything to get what they want. You can't ever trust them. There's this stupid saying that I hate more than anything else. How do you know an addict is lying? Their lips are moving. When you start off from this concept that the addicts are damaged, defective, lying pieces of shit, you've lost. It's that simple. So my argument is almost every treatment facility you go to brings your lover in, brings your loved one in, brings your child, brings your husband, brings your parent in, saying to them, you're broken and we're going to try to make you okay. Well, they're not broken. If you look at those 4 factors and you understand why your loved one has started using, I guarantee I can show you from beginning to end exactly why they ended up where they are. They worked exactly the way they were supposed to. So here's the magic. All those effects, the Pygmalion effect, stereotype threat, observer expectancy, all of those also work in the other direction. If you start seeing the good, if you start seeing the power, if you start seeing the positive aspect of the person sitting in front of you, they will start living more by those principles and you will start seeing more of them. One of the studies I want to mention really, really fast was a study done with women and math. There was this huge belief that women are not as good at math, and so these researchers were actually ingenious. They took Asian women, Asian girls, and they gave them math questions under 2 separate conditions. In the first one, they had them identify their gender. Are you a boy or are you a girl? In the second one, they had them identify their race. Why is this important? It's important because we believe that women are not as good at math, or we did during the time of the study. But we believe that Asian people of Asian origin are better at math than others. So in one condition, the women were pointed towards a stereotype that would make them act and answer less questions appropriately. They would get less questions right. And in the second one, towards the stereotype, they would expect that they would answer more questions correctly. And the results bore this out. When the girls were asked to identify their gender, they scored lower than the average. When they were asked to identify their race, they scored higher. I want you to take a deep breath and close your eyes and imagine the power that this simple representation can give you in your life. The way you model, the way you show the people in your life what's expected of them will change the way they behave. And that's why I always start with a clear belief in the person in front of me. They can beat this, they have a bright future in front of them, and they are incredibly powerful beings. The only question really is what path we have to take and how I can guide them there. That's it. Now, if I'm right, this is a very different explanation of the problem than you've ever gotten as a family member before. And I'm not only using my own example here. You know, I've worked with so many families, and I want to talk to you about just a couple of them, just a couple of the families, and I'll introduce more of their story here in a minute. But one of the families that I'm talking about was the family of a woman I call Melissa in my stories. And when they came to see me, they had already gone to 4 rehabs and about as many sober livings. They had spent 6 years fighting this thing, having spent more than $500,000. And really, they thought that their daughter would always be stuck with these 6 clinical diagnoses she got. She was bipolar, borderline, generalized anxiety disorder, and she was addicted to alcohol, marijuana, and nitrous oxide. And so I was kind of like a last resort. They really were just hoping they could get a daughter who didn't have to live in rehab and who could sort of function on her own. And because I was able to keep that curiosity, I'm telling you right now, the same woman just last year actually graduated grad school, got a new job. She's been living out of her parents' house since we finished working together. There's so much power in knowing that somebody else can beat what they have, and so much powerlessness in telling them that they can't. Now here's the magic. There are tools and processes and systems that work to help people change. Not force them, as you'll see, help them change. And for that, I'll start out with a quote I first heard from a coach that I follow named Myron Golden. And he said this thing that really hit me hard, like as a psychology doctor, like this is just magical. People only do things because they feel like it. What was the quote? Listen to that again. People only do things because they feel like it. Well, you've been told over and over that what you need to do is make your loved one get help in a certain way. Make them understand that they need it. Make them force them into it. Or that you need to use tough love to get somebody to change. But if you think about it, people only do things because they feel like it. So your job isn't to get somebody into treatment. Your job is to get them to want to go to treatment, to feel like they want to go. It's different, and it's doable, and it's magic when it works. And that reminds me of a family that I just recently started working with about 2 months ago. 2 months ago, the son had blown through about $150,000 worth of opiates. He was out of school, had been out of school for a couple of years, was pretty much depressed and sitting at home. They tried everything. This is the first family. I don't want to give too many details because I don't want to call them out so somebody can know who they are. But this is the first family I've ever known who started engaging in some of the treatments, some of the most alternative treatments with their son, just to show them how behind him they were. But here's the problem. Every single time it would work for a tiny, short period of time, like a couple of days, a week, sometimes less than that. And then it would go right back to where it was before. And when they came to see me, as usual, they were skeptical because they'd already gone through this 4, 5, 6 times. And I said, look, I can't promise anything, but I can promise your son wants to get better. So let's figure out if we can do it. It's now a month and a half, almost 2 months later. He's completely off of opiates, has been for a month. Is actually excited about the prospect of moving forward in a way that supports the way he wants to live, going back to school, figuring out what his career is going to be and where he's going from here and all that. Now, again, to be clear, there's a lot of work still to do, but after 3 to 4 years of trying things that always fell apart really quickly, everybody is cautiously optimistic in a way they've never been before. And that gets me to the next point. Tough love is just bullshit. Dr. Andrew Tatarsky and I were having dinner one day here in LA, and he said this in a really, really beautiful way. He said, it's not tough love, it's just love. What does that mean? What it means is in a lot of families, boundaries have been completely broken. So it's not love. It's become this enmeshed, weird reality where you just do whatever you feel like is the right thing in the moment. But boundaries are important and they're incredibly powerful. And so one of the things we actually have to teach families, everybody in the family, is how to love each other, how to show the love, how to communicate the love, and how to be consistent about the love. Because here's the thing, everybody wants to feel better. Nobody wants to feel like shit. When we stop focusing on what we want for our loved one or what everybody told us they need or what we wish they did, and instead we start focusing on what they want, people become magically interested in change. Remember what I said before? People only do things because they feel like it. Well, I got to tell you, I've never met a resistant client. Because when you start working on what they feel like doing, everybody wants to go. So I went a little long here today, but I think it's worth it. You know, in my own story, after 3 years of using traditional approaches and showing my family that I was okay, I found a different way to go. And because they learned to trust me by that point, they supported me and went along, even though it made them anxious sometimes. It's now 19 years later, and I'm good. And I would say I'm normal and good. So whether I was a meth addict, quote unquote, or whatever I was 20 years ago, none of those things apply anymore. With Melissa, that woman I told you, that family that spent over $500,000 on 4 different rehabs and thought their daughter was going to be stuck forever, they send me cards and we communicate now on just how grateful they are to have a daughter they never thought they'd get back home. And that family that I mentioned that I started working with a couple of months ago, they're more optimistic than ever before. And what it took was a complete change of the ideas they had about the nature of the addiction problem itself and the way to move forward. It looks like magic, but it works almost every time. And I've been getting people asking me for this for years. And so this weekend, I'm offering for the first time an online workshop that is actually going to teach families how to do this and finally put these principles into use. I've been literally asked for about 2 years all the time. I'm not the one struggling. It's my loved one. What do I do? And so if you go to bit.ly.com/family SOS, all caps, family SOS, we're going to hold a workshop this weekend to get you started there. And then what I'm working on is a full program that will be loaded with resources and referrals and the tools for you to start using this in your life. Because here's the number one takeaway. And again, I want you to send this to anybody you know who fits the description of either struggling and having a family who doesn't understand, or being the family of somebody who's struggling and not knowing what to do. The number one takeaway is this. For all of you out there, there's a solution. There might be multiple solutions. Now, I don't know what they are right now, but your job is to go find them. And when people tell you there's only one way, call bullshit and move forward. There's a saying I love. It's not actually from AA, but they bastardize it or steal it in AA all the time. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. Well, if you try the same thing over and over and it's always failed, it's time to try something new. Science has taken us a long way in the last 100 years, and I hope you will join us. I hope you will send this to families who are struggling so that they can get the help they need and we can eradicate this problem. Thank you everybody for tuning in. Love you all so much. Have a great weekend. See you next week.
Thank you for tuning in to the Ignited Heroes Recovery Podcast. I really hope you found the information here useful and that we'll see you back here next week. And look, I want to make sure that this podcast is the most useful it can be for you, so please let me know by emailing info@ignited.com if there are any specific topics or questions you'd like to have addressed. As usual, if you like this episode, I would love for you to leave us a 5-star review and rating. Thanks, and see you next week.